Choke points are everywhere in Total War, from dedicated choke point maps to sieges to various maps that just have little rock faces that can form a kind of choke point. There's plenty for us to utilize, so let's look at some ways that we can make the most of them. So if we have these dedicated choke point maps, the first thing I'd recommend is not to split your army up if possible. If we can get them in a situation where it's our entire army versus half of their army, that's great. We should be able to quickly overwhelm that first half, maybe before the second half arrives, and then the second half of their army can fight our entire army as well. Of course, you shouldn't ignore the incoming second army. You should put up some defenses, but just enough to buy time while the rest of your army deals with the first half of the army. So this is an ideal strategy, breaking the enemy army in half, but that's just pure luck on where they decide to send their units. That being said, it's not completely out of the question to spread your army over 2 choke points, at least if they're a bit closer together. It's really a situational thing, and you need to see what the enemy throws at you. In this case, they're apparently throwing amphibious zombies at me as they could walk through water. What is this? Much like a normal land battle as well, you'll want to pay attention to the matchups coming your way. If you've got some armor-piercing anti-infantry unit like the Graveguard coming, you'll probably want to try and counter them, lest they break through your front line and ruin the whole choke point tactic. In this case, I'm sending over some hammerers to answer those Graveguard great weapons, so play the front line like any other front line. If there's monsters coming over, send over some anti-large. If there's heavy armor coming over, send over some armor-piercing. But with this kind of situation where most of the army goes down one of the 2 paths, that's when you want to move your units over to the other side to all put most of your army facing most of their army, right? We're looking to match the power so we don't get overrun. Any kind of flanking is going to be powerful here too. If you've got flying units with missiles, or maybe you Vanguard deployed some missile units behind them, some skirmish cav or something, just shooting the enemy in the back is going to provide some nice leadership penalties and damage. One of the best tactical opportunities these kind of choke point battles will bring you as well is that the AI will pretty reliably clump up all their troops, run them all into the back of each other, and then you can absolutely destroy them with magic or any other kind of AoE attack, explosions from artillery perhaps. So if you have the capability to take advantage of the clumped up enemies, you should definitely do it as soon and as often as possible. Wind spells, bombardment spells, explosion spells, even direct damage area spells can be incredibly powerful in these situations. Just like here, as the enemy brings all of its units into like one of my enemy units, when of course they probably should be flanking around, trying to come around these units, or at least spreading out across the units that are there. But hey, that's the AI for you. We're going to punish them for it though. Look at that nice clump of troops there, ready to drop some kind of spell over here. We're bringing in the cavalry, bringing in the dragon as well with that fear and terror, just doing a lot of work on those clumped up troops taking advantage. And these kind of situations are one of the rare times where I'd recommend you can use those moving vortex spells that are very expensive and may potentially miss everyone. But in these kind of clumped up troop situations, they're pretty much guaranteed to do some good work, so a worthwhile investment. Now, if you've got missile units and you want to make the most of them, and you've got enough melee units to pull this tactic off, you can try making a bit of a V shape to allow some of your missile units to get better angles on the backs of enemies. So what I'm going to do is position one of my missile units here to shoot these opposite enemies in the back. And the same thing on the other side, some handgunners here, going to shoot the opposite units in the back. This will also take away the advantage of any shields the enemy may have, and will provide you a much clearer shot than if you tried to shoot the units that are right in front of you. And that's what I'm trying to do here in this example, but along comes a big old spider and a foot of Gork, which is going to put a massive gaping hole in my precious line. And that brings me to another important point: to have reserves ready to fill holes in case this kind of thing happens. And luckily for me in this case, I've got halberds nearby. They can go and fill the hole that is now left by the destroyed swordsman. So don't leave your other melee units that aren't on the front line too far back. Keep them ready and close to fill holes where needed. Now here you can see these missiles are now doing their job, shooting all the opposite units that they've got a nice clean shot at. They're also raised up on a bit of high ground, which is a really good advantage to try and take. This will do extra damage to units on lower elevation, so that's always nice. But getting those angles, using your infantry units in this way, if you've got enough infantry units to pull this off, to get that V shape, you can really allow your missiles to do a lot more work, which is pretty important if you do rely on your missiles to win these battles for you. Furthermore, this kind of tactic can work incredibly well in sieges defending gates. If you've got the units, things like hybrid units that can do melee and missiles are the best for this, like these armored Kossars. I've also got some Streltsy up here positioned above the gate that are going to shoot down very strong, powerful missiles capable of a lot of damage if they can keep consistently firing. So whatever comes through that gate is going to be shot from behind by these Streltsy from above while they fight or the armored Kossars that are waiting for them below. But the armored Kossars do have their pistols, so while the enemy is fighting one unit of Kossars, they'll be shot by the other two. So we're creating a kind of kill box that will take out anything that comes into it, provided we can keep those missiles firing for as long as possible. And here it is in effect. We've got some lizards coming in, and they're all getting shot from all angles from my Kossars whilst trying to fight one of the units of Kossars. This is also going to take away the shield advantage of something like Saurus warriors as well, because we're shooting them in the back. Those shields won't do anything for them. So we can rack up some serious damage and make good use of our ammo, not wasting it on shields. Although the effectiveness of this tactic will depend on how the AI decides to behave. As you can see in this situation, they're all kind of barreling to one side, so it's making it work pretty damn well. If they spread out and were attacking all my Kossars so they couldn't fire, there wouldn't be so many missiles going off and it wouldn't be as effective, but you've still got those Streltsy raining down on them, so there'd still be some good damage going off. And in this situation, against Lizardmen, who are generally quite expensive with their units, they've done 700 damage so far, the Streltsy. That's quickly going to turn into 1,400, and by the end of the battle, they've got about 2,000 damage done. So needless to say, this kill box has been very effective, not to mention the damage that the armored Kossars will have as well. If you don't have a hybrid unit that can shoot missiles, you could put missile units on the outside of the box and just have melee units defending the inside, like we did with the V-shaped tactic from the Empire. Now here's one choke point related tactic that's pretty much essential if you're playing a ranged faction and you plan to make use of the choke point using all your missiles like Kislev here. You have to be sure that you're not outranged by the enemy, because if they don't have to come to you and they've got the ranged advantage, they're just going to bombard the crap out of you and you can't just sit there and take it. In this case, against the Skaven, there's Jezzails that have more range than us, there's mortars that have more range than us, a catapult artillery as well. We need to be aware that there's nothing we're going to be able to do about these units while we're in a choke point fight. So even if they come to attack us with all their melee units, they're still going to be sat back with all those missile units destroying us with their range. So what we can try and do before the enemy arrives to the choke point so that we can get the units out cleanly is take any kind of harassing fast units you have, like cavalry, chariots, doggos, bring them out to the other side of the choke point, get them out the way as quickly as possible so the enemy can't take them out. In this case, I'm going to send my lancers to the trees, and eventually I'm going to try and flank round with them to get after whatever's necessary. In this case, the catapult and those Jezzails and mortars, I need to take those out, otherwise they're going to shoot the crap out of us. And that is indeed what we're going to be able to do. There is going to be some units that come after our cavalry, but they foolishly left their plate claw catapult undefended, because, you know, AI. So if we take that out, it's going to save our main army a lot of damage. You can see the mortars and Jezzails, though, firing away at my main army, so I need to get after them. But we've managed to use our speed and maneuverability here to run around the Skaven units that tried to get our cavalry and to get into this artillery and take care of it as quickly as possible. The other unit over here moving towards the Jezzails and mortars, I want to put a stop to them. Even if I can't kill them off, if I can at least stop them from firing for a few minutes, that's going to buy time for my front line to maybe destroy most of this cheap Skaven army and then push through and get after those missiles and shoot them if we need to. It could be wise to do this in any situation of a choke point battle, to be honest. Having that cavalry on their side of the choke point allows you to potentially get behind them and do stuff like this, or just to hammer and anvil that front line that comes charging into your front line. Also, having cavalry on our side of the choke point, they're not going to be that much use other than filling holes in the front line or going to fight on the front line. Using their mobility like this, though, is going to make them much more useful and more powerful. So if you've got any kind of mobility advantage, try to make use of it. Don't just leave it sat behind the front line, not really doing anything while your front line gets slaughtered. Try to get it behind the enemy and do what you can. It's not always possible, but it's great if you can. Or if you have Vanguard deployable units, chuck them behind the enemy. Maybe if you can, sneakily hide them until the moment is right. Wait till the enemy is all engaged, and then that's a hammer and anvil heaven. In some cases, though, with some maps, you'll have a choke point that isn't really like a super choke point like this one. It's really wide, so it's hardly a choke point, but we do have these ledges and edges that we can make use of to just stop the enemy from getting behind us so easily. In this case, against a Nurgle army that is pretty much all melee, we really need to try and stop them getting behind us because our army relies a lot on missiles. I've got a lot of strong missile units here. I need to use their ammo to be able to defeat this army. If I can't, I'm probably going to lose. I've got shades, I've got 3 dark shards, I've got some repeater crossbows as well. I need to make good use of those powerful armor-piercing missiles, or I'm going to lose. So blocking up this choke point, holding all these melee units in place so they can't easily get behind us, allows my missile units time to use up their ammo. So look for choke points on every map. It doesn't have to be one of those normal choke point specific maps. There's rock faces and stuff all over the place to make good use of. Perhaps in some situations you may also find that you're not the one with the choke point advantage and the enemy may start nearer to them and you'll have to actually fight for them. But if you can get there as fast as possible to try and hold like this choke point, there's a lot of beastmen coming. I do not want them all spilling over and surrounding my army. I've got to try and fill that hole and take control of that choke point. So that's what I'm going to do with my cavalry, sending these over just to stop the enemy and hold them in place for as long as possible until my infantry can arrive to actually form a proper choke point, which they will eventually do. My battle pilgrims arrive here to fill up this choke point and prevent all of these beastmen units from just charging in and getting behind us. I can now pull my cavalry back. Their job is done for now. There's also half of the enemy army coming up behind us though, so we're having to form up a point over here as well. I've got some foot squires, so I'm kind of having to split my army in two here, which of course I said earlier is not a great idea, but it's not necessarily bad if you're meeting two armies with two armies yourself. As long as things are kind of evenly matched and you can hold them back, you're fine. What you're missing though is the opportunity to put your entire army against just half of the enemy army, which will allow you to destroy them very quickly, very often. But things are very situational. In this case, I don't have a lot of high, fast damage output to take care of this group first before I go and deal with the second group, so I'm going to split my army up. I've got enough troops to pull it off. If I felt like perhaps I didn't have enough troops, then maybe I would try to commit to taking out this first blob as quickly as possible. I don't have the magic on my side though. I've got life magic here, which of course is very good, but not good for taking out these large clumps of enemies that the AI often likes to gift us in these choke point situations. Luckily on this backside though, the competition isn't too tough. It's mostly just some cheap infantry and stuff, so our foot squires and missiles are able to hold them off, keep them at bay. We've got reserves there if we need them. Again, we're just trying to get angles here with our missile units. We're not standing directly behind our melee units, so we can barely shoot anything. Taking these kind of side angles is very, very powerful, allows your missiles to get much cleaner shots, and that means more damage. And of course, the AI here really should be trying to flank around. Then we'd really be in trouble if they did actually flank properly. But as they don't, we're going to take advantage. They're all going to come in one way. We're going to hammer and anvil them here with some cavalry. And it's going to be a winnable fight. So there's a few things to think about with your choke point battles, whether they are the dedicated maps or ones like this where you're just making use of parts of the map that happen to have little choke points. It can be very powerful to make use of. Maybe more for ranged factions. If you've got that ranged advantage, this can be very useful to hold the enemy in place while your missiles absolutely rain down. If you're a rush faction, maybe they're not going to be that useful to you. But if you can make good use of choke points in any kind of situation, it can certainly allow the opportunity for a smaller force to beat a much larger force. That could be one single stack beating two full stacks potentially, if you can utilize that choke point well, do plenty of damage on all the blobbed up troops, which shouldn't be a problem if you've got the right magic and missiles available. So yes, plenty of advantages from choke points to utilize in all kinds of battles. Thanks to the Patreon patrons and YouTube members who support this channel. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the future.